Hello, I'm Rob Coston with Nautilus International, and I'm here to talk about something really important for a growing section of our members. That is maritime professionals working on board super yachts. People might not know that Nautilus represents maritime professionals working in the UK, Netherlands, and Switzerland normally, but we're actually recognised as the global union for those of any rank and in any role working on board a super yacht. Um, so today I'd like to have a conversation about that really big issue. It's unpaid wages, which is a really serious thing for a lot of people in the super yacht sector. And the reason I want to get into it now is Nautilus have just had a big success in that area over the last year. So here to tell me all about it is one of our yacht organisers, Cheryl McCann. Cheryl, thanks very much for joining me today.
Hi, Rob. Thank you.
Thank you. So um, let's get into it. What is going on with unpaid wages? What has Nautilus achieved there recently?
So I think in 2024, looking back at the figures, I think the overall figure between the yacht team and our legal team was 2.17 million in recovery and unpaid wages. I think the yacht team was probably about 1.2 million that they'd recovered. Now that is obviously without formal legal intervention, so that still is significantly high. But then the legal team as well, there's a considerable amount that's been recovered there as well for 2024.
Yeah, that is a lot of money
Mm.
that needed to be recovered by our teams. I know this is an ongoing issue for many years. Um, can you just tell me a little bit about the difference there? So what's the difference between what you're doing on the yacht team side and what the legal team are doing? What are those different approaches?
So initially, the cases will come into myself and my colleague Laura in the yacht team. So we will obtain the initial information from the member and obviously open up that dialogue initially with the member and find out what the issue is. Sometimes we find, unfortunately, it's the rarity, but sometimes we find that the unpaid or late wages can be down to an error. Sometimes things can be missed, and then it'd be a very quick email or conversation to try and rectify that, and it can be resolved very quickly. Unfortunately, the majority of the time, it is intentionally unpaid for one reason or another. So we would then open up the channels of communication between ourselves and the relevant stakeholders, so the owner, employer, management company, whoever was needed, and try and ascertain what the reason is. What's the reason why the wage is unpaid? Once we kind of know what the issue is and what we're dealing with, then we would outline to them why we believe that that is incorrect. So this is a contractual obligation. It's owed to our member contractually for these reasons, and we would outline that to them. It usually, a lot of the cases we're able to resolve that way. It might be a bit back and forth, a bit to and fro with correspondence. Sometimes they may completely agree and then the issue will be resolved. Sometimes they will dispute it, again, for one reason or another, and we would have to then continue that arbitration to see if we can resolve. So that's kind of where we come in initially. And as I say, thankfully, the majority of cases we are able to resolve. And I think that's reflected in the figures that we're seeing as by way of recovery by the yacht team. That's not always the case. And we do get situations where it either becomes very clear that we're not going to be able to resolve that at that level, because our aim, we've got to remember, our aim is to always try and resolve the cases at the lowest level possible and as informally as possible if we can. Obviously, that's the benefit for all parties. So that's always what we're trying to aim to do. And that's where myself and Laura come into it. If that's not possible, then we will refer the case over to our legal team. So we would outline again to the relevant stakeholders. This, would reiterate our case. Basically, we would say this is the situation. These are the contractual entitlements that aren't being met. We believe they should be met for these reasons. Would support that by way of evidence and say this is why we believe that they should be owed. And then if that's not resolved, it's referred over to legal. They would then continue to progress the claim. And usually that involves either them entering into correspondence with the legal team themselves, or they would then go on and instruct lawyers in the relevant jurisdiction or jurisdictions, because sometimes there can be more than one that's relevant.
Yeah, so you mentioned there that sometimes or very often the cases we're dealing with are deliberate non-payment of wages. And for people who are perhaps new to the sector or who aren't really aware of this issue too much, why would somebody choose not to pay wages to their crew when they have a contractual
Mm.
obligation to do that?
I think it usually comes down to there being some kind of dispute. So like I said before, sometimes it can be a genuine error, and we do see them, situations now and then, but usually it's because the employee, so the seafarer and our member, believes that they are owed something under their contract, and the employer or the ship owner will say they don't believe they're owed it for this reason. And usually when we first get the case, that reason may not always be entirely clear, so we would then reach out and say, this is what we believe is owed, why has it not been paid? And then obviously they would then say, this is why it's not been paid. And then that's kind of where we then enter into not necessarily a negotiation, because it shouldn't be a negotiation. If they're contractually owed it, then they're contractually owed it, they should just be paid. So it's not a negotiation, it's more of a discussion as to why we say that the steps that they've taken are incorrect and that they need to be rectified.
Yeah, so I think we would say really clearly, being a Nautilus member is like an insurance policy for something like this, that if it happens, if you're a Nautilus member, you're going to get our support to get that money for you. But I'm also curious, obviously we want to help people avoid this situation, even if they're a Nautilus member, because it can be very stressful for people. So is there anything people can do to avoid this kind of issue? Are there employers they should look out for? Are there warning signs that something like this might happen to you when you're taking a job?
I think it's more about just carrying out your own due diligence, really, making sure, obviously, a contract is key, making sure you've got a contract, an agreed contract in place before you head out to the vessel. So that's really important. We speak to members more often than what we would like, where they are in a vulnerable position because they've travelled out to the vessel on the pretense that they will receive a contract when they arrive. Sometimes that happens, and then there may be no issue, but a lot of the time, obviously, when we hear from our members, it's because that's not worked out the way they thought it would. Sometimes they arrive and the contract doesn't appear. Sometimes they arrive and they do get the contract, but it's not in the same terms as what was discussed beforehand. So I think the key message is to make sure you've got an agreed contract in place before you join the vessel. Unfortunately, we don't always know why an employer or a ship owner or management company may make the decisions they make. I don't feel like it's our role to sort of figure out why they've made those decisions. I feel our role is to step in and try and get that rectified. In an ideal world, that wouldn't happen in the first place, but it does. So, we just have to step in where we can and make sure that we can provide support to our members. And as you said before, Rob, I think it is, although obviously Nautilus membership is not an insurance policy, I think the principles behind it are kind of the same. The membership needs to be in full and it needs to be in place prior to any issue arising, and then you will be entitled to the full support of Nautilus. Obviously, every case has to be assessed on its merits at the time, but yeah, that's the key point.
Yeah, and it actually reminded me, we publish a document of guidance on your seafarers employment agreement for yacht crew. I'll put a link to that in the chat here in case anybody would like to look that up, because that just gives some really basic advice on what to look out for when you're taking on that contract for the first time. So yeah, getting back to the figures, it was I think you said 2.17 million this year. I think the year before that was a bit higher, but was quite skewed by the Russian situation.
I think that was 2022, wasn't it? I think was the significant recovery.
Yeah, that's right. Which was really, oh yes, that's right. Sorry, it was 2022 that was the highest. 2023 was down again a bit, and this year it's shot up again. So, I've been following this for several years. It looks like this is a real ongoing problem. Is it improving at all? Yeah, what's the situation like out there?
I mean, it's clear there's still an issue with unpaid or late wages. Well, I'll just say unpaid for ease, but there's still clearly an issue. I think that speaks volumes in the recovery of the sums that we are supporting our members in being paid. As to why that is, I don't have those answers. I think in 2022 it was a little bit different, because I think we certainly saw a significant impact because of the cases connected to the Russian sanctions. But even in 2024, that will have been impacted by cases that have resolved in that year. We know there was, significant recovery for a case that was resolved in 2024 that was impacted by the Russian sanctions. So we know that will have sort of bumped up the figures a little bit. But even the year before, 2023, I think it was 1.3 million. It's still a significant amount. It's not, it's not a small figure, is it? Really, ideally we would like to see that figure coming down, because then that would mean there'd be less of a problem in the industry of unpaid wages. But it's either increasing at the moment, or it's at least staying at quite a moderate figure.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to ask about as well is I think that figure also includes other benefits that people aren't
Yeah.
receiving. So what are those? What kind of things aren't people getting other than their unpaid wages? Just so that they're aware of that could be an issue and that they can come to us if they experience that problem.
Yeah, I mean, the unpaid wages recovery will include unpaid salary, so just the general salary, but it also include unpaid accrued leave, unpaid notice periods. So it will all come under the umbrella of the unpaid wages, but it could be any one or all of those issues within there. As a yacht team and as Nautilus, we do provide support for other matters in addition to unpaid wages. So we provide advice, representation, and support for matters of assistance with repatriation if they're not being repatriated, which is their contractual right and a statutory right as well. Bullying, harassment, grievances, disciplinaries, all of these things is what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. I think the recovery side of the monetary matters is focused around the unpaid wages.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I suppose the last thing I wanted to ask about is if somebody thinks they are experiencing this issue, if they think that if their wages are late, for example, and they're worried about this, I guess the best thing is to get in touch as soon as possible so that you can start monitoring the case. So yeah, how should they get in touch with you? What's the best way?
The best way is to get in touch directly with the yacht team. So that's yachts@nautilusint.org. And if they get in touch with us directly, then that inbox is triaged by myself and my colleague Laura and the yacht team. So we will pick that up, and then we would make initial contact with the member, and then obviously start making the initial inquiries, so we can ascertain what the issue is first and foremost, what we then need to do to assist the member, and then we can get those steps moving as quickly as possible. The sooner we do it, the better. The sooner the member gets in touch, the sooner we can start taking that action and get things moving.